The Zarantine armada burst out of hyperspace like a swarm of demonic locusts unleashed from the bowels of hell itself, immediately swarming the outmatched human fleet with a barrage of antimatter missiles and planet-cracking singularity torpedoes. Admiral Randy Mitchell gritted his teeth as he watched 3 more of his battlecruisers wink out of existence in blinding flashes of light, consumed by the ruthless Zarantine onslaught. The war had been a brutal meat grinder, a relentless Zarantine campaign of destruction, carving a bloody swath across the galaxy, with the technologically advanced alien armada effortlessly crushing any resistance. For months, Admiral Mitchell had led his ragtag human fleet in a desperate fighting retreat, staging daring hit-and-run attacks to slow the Zarantine advance. But it was never enough. The Zarantine ships were simply too fast, too powerful, too numerous. Commanded by the genocidal alien warlord Fenris, who took sadistic glee in slaughtering entire human colonies, the Zarantine fleet seemed invincible as they drew ever closer to the core human worlds, burning and pillaging everything in their path. Mitchell knew that unless something changed, and fast, it would only be a matter of time before humanity was wiped out entirely, reduced to ashes and painful memories. In a last desperate gambit, Mitchell had gone all in, launching a suicidal diversionary attack on a critical Zarantine supply depot. The depot was destroyed, but at immense cost, half the human fleet was obliterated in the process. Yet the sacrifice bought enough time for a small team of human operatives to infiltrate the Zarantine flagship and sabotage its jump drives, crippling the alien fleet's mobility. It was humanity's first real victory in months, but Mitchell knew it would be short-lived at best. Already, long-range scans showed the Zarantine forces regrouping around a volatile nebula, with Fenris gathering his strength for a decisive final strike against the human core worlds. Billions of lives hung in the balance. Men, women, children, families. If Fenris broke through the last line of defense, it would be a slaughter unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Mitchell's fleet was in tatters, his ships and crews pushed past the breaking point, running on fumes and sheer stubborn human tenacity. He knew they didn't have a chance in hell of stopping Fenris alone. Humanity needed a miracle. And then it came, an encrypted, tight-beam message from Earth. Admiral Mitchell felt a surge of hope as he listened to the transmission. A top-secret human reinforcement fleet, Omega Fleet, was en route, with enough advanced ships and weaponry to turn the tide of the war. But that hope was tempered by grim reality. Mitchell knew that Omega Fleet's existence would be seen as a profound betrayal by humanity's galactic allies, who had long urged diplomacy and peaceful coexistence over militarization and deterrence. If Omega Fleet was deployed, it would damage those alliances, perhaps irreparably. Humanity would be seen as warmongers and conquerors no better than the Zarantines. As the Zarantine fleet began powering up their repaired jump drives and setting an intercept course for the human core worlds, Admiral Mitchell wrestled with the impossible choice before him. Stand on principle and rely on his battered conventional fleet in a battle he knew humanity could not win, staying true to his allies' wishes but dooming untold billions to die in agony, or deploy the forbidden Omega Fleet reinforcements to stop the Zarantine genocide and save humanity at the cost of humanity's soul and any hope for a peaceful future with their galactic neighbors. It was not a choice any moral being should ever have to make. But with the cruel math of survival facing him, Admiral Mitchell knew that in the end, he would pay any price to protect humanity, no matter how terrible. The fate of the human species and its place in the universe hung on the next words Mitchell would say. In this defining moment, the battle-weary admiral would have to find a way to win the war, without losing what it meant to be human. Randy's finger hovered over the transmit button, the weight of his decision bearing down on him like the crushing pressure of a black hole. He knew that once he sent the encrypted message back to Earth, there would be no turning back. The arrival of Omega Fleet would change everything, for better or worse. With a deep breath, Randy stabbed the button. Omega Fleet, this is Admiral Mitchell. Execute jump to my coordinates. I repeat, execute jump now. Godspeed. Mere moments later, Space itself seemed to shudder and convulse as a massive wormhole tore open near the beleaguered human fleet's position. From its swirling incandescent depths emerged the sleek, deadly shapes of Omega Fleet's advanced warships, their hulls gleaming with the promise of retribution. The Zarantine armada reeled back in surprise as the human reinforcements screamed out of the wormhole, weapons blazing. Lances of searing energy and storms of high-velocity projectiles ripped into the alien formation, shredding ships and sending debris spinning into the void. Aboard his flagship, Fenris snarled in rage and disbelief as his tactical displays showed the sudden, devastating losses. "Where did they come from?" he roared, slamming a clawed fist onto his command console. "All ships, engage the new human vessels. Destroy them!" As the two fleets clashed in a cataclysmic firestorm of destruction, Randy's comm system chimed with an incoming hail. "Admiral Mitchell, this is Admiral Grayson of Omega Fleet." A steely voice crackled over the link. "Apologies for the late arrival, but we came as soon as we could." "Your timing couldn't be better, Admiral," Randy replied, his voice thick with relief and gratitude. "What's the status of your ships?" "We've got some new tricks up our sleeves," Grayson said, a hint of pride in his tone. "Experimental AI targeting systems, quantum-entangled comms, these ships are a cut above anything the Zarantines have faced before. We'll make them pay for every inch of space." And pay they did. The Omega Fleet ships tore into the Zarantine ranks like wolves among sheep, their advanced weaponry and coordination allowing them to inflict devastating damage. But the Zarantines were nothing if not adaptable, and they quickly shifted tactics to counter the new threat. "All ships, fall back and regroup," Fenris commanded, his voice seething with barely controlled fury. "Concentrate fire on the human flanks and rear. Don't let them box us in." The Zarantine ships peeled away and reformed, then surged forward again in a vicious counterattack. Plasma torpedoes and graviton pulses hammered the human shields, straining them to the limit. Omega Fleet's vessels shuddered and buckled under the onslaught, their incredible technology pushed to the breaking point. "Grayson, we need to protect the colony worlds," Randy shouted into the comm, his own ship rocking violently as enemy fire pounded its defenses. "Form a perimeter around the planets. Use your ships as a shield. My fleet will harass their rear guard, try to disrupt their attack." "Acknowledged, Admiral," Grayson replied grimly. "Omega Fleet, assume defensive formation Delta 6 around the colonies. Concentrate point defense fire on incoming ordnance." As Omega Fleet moved to shelter the vulnerable human worlds, Randy's battered ships swung around in a daring flanking maneuver. Antimatter missiles and hypervelocity railgun rounds scythed into the Zarantine rear lines, sowing chaos and destruction. But Fenris was far from beaten. His monstrous flagship, the Void Hammer, surged forward through the maelstrom, its immensely powerful energy weapons incinerating any human ship foolish enough to stand in its path. Randy watched in horror as he realized Fenris's plan. He was going to destroy Omega Fleet's command ship. "All ships, this is Admiral Mitchell," he roared into the fleet-wide comm. "Concentrate fire on the Void Hammer. We can't let that thing reach our lines." But it was too late. The Void Hammer burst through the perimeter, shrugging off the combined fire of a dozen human warships. Its spinal cannons pulsed with malevolent light as it bore down on Grayson's flagship. In that moment, Randy knew what he had to do. "Helmsman, set an intercept course," he barked. "Ramming speed!" His bridge crew looked at him in shock and dismay, but he met their gazes unflinchingly. "We're the only ones close enough to stop it," he said softly. "It's been an honor serving with you all." As his ship hurtled towards the Void Hammer like an avenging angel, Randy spared a final thought for all the lives he'd sworn to protect. The brave men and women under his command, the innocent civilians huddled in fear on the colony worlds. And he prayed that this desperate sacrifice would be enough to save them. The wreckage of battle drifted silently through space as Randy Mitchell's battered fleet limped towards the Allied outpost. Repair crews swarmed over the hulls of damaged ships, welding torn metal and patching breached compartments. Inside his command vessel, Randy slumped in his chair, exhausted but relieved. They'd survived, but at a terrible cost. A priority message flashed on his console. Randy's stomach clenched as he read it. An emergency meeting with the Allied leaders. He knew this moment would come, but dreaded it all the same. The meeting chamber buzzed with tension as Randy entered. Alien faces turned to regard him with a mix of fear, anger, and suspicion. The Quarian ambassador, his crystalline form glittering, spoke first. "Admiral Mitchell, we demand an explanation for this Omega fleet. Its very existence violates our treaties and threatens the stability of the entire region." Randy took a deep breath. "The Omega fleet was our last resort against the Zarantine threat. Last resort?" interrupted the Valaxian delegate, tendrils writhing. "You developed an entire secret armada. This goes far beyond self-defense." "With all due respect," Randy said, struggling to keep his voice level, "you didn't see what I saw out there. The Zarantines were slaughtering us. Entire colonies wiped out. Without Omega Fleet, humanity would be extinct right now." The chamber erupted in shouts and accusations. Randy stood firm as the alien leaders hurled questions and demands at him. When the cacophony subsided, the Quarian ambassador's voice cut through the silence. "We are left with no choice. Either humanity agrees to decommission Omega Fleet and share its technological secrets, or we will withdraw all support. You will face the Zarantines alone." Randy opened his mouth to respond, but alarms suddenly blared throughout the station. A lieutenant burst into the chamber, face pale. "Sirs, we're detecting a massive energy surge from Zarantine space. Subspace distortions off the charts." The room's hollow display flickered to life, showing a pulsing red anomaly deep in enemy territory. Data scrolled across the screen as the sensors struggled to make sense of the readings. "It can't be," whispered the Valaxian. "The singularity cannon. It was just a legend." Randy's blood ran cold as intelligence reports flooded in. Fenris's contingency plan, a doomsday weapon capable of collapsing entire star systems, and it was powering up, aimed straight at the galactic core. The bickering and accusations of moments ago were forgotten as the horrible reality sank in. Trillions of lives across countless species were in imminent danger. The Quarian ambassador turned to Randy, voice grave. "It seems we have no choice but to work together. Admiral Mitchell, we need your expertise to lead a coalition fleet against this threat." Randy nodded, mind already racing with tactical possibilities. "We'll need every ship we can muster. Omega Fleet, your forces, everyone." As the alien leaders dispersed to rally their forces, Randy strode purposefully towards the hangar bay. His crew fell in behind him, faces set with perseverance. The future of the cosmos now rested on their shoulders. As Randy boarded his command ship, he couldn't shake a nagging doubt. Why would the Zarantines resort to such an extreme measure? What could drive them to this level of desperation? He pushed the thoughts aside as the fleet prepared to jump. There would be time for questions later. For now, they had a galaxy to save. Randy Mitchell gripped the edge of the tactical display, his fingers tightening as he watched the massive Zarantine armada come into view. The rogue planet loomed behind them, its surface overflowing with defense platforms and the ominous silhouette of the Singularity Cannon installation. "All ships, this is Admiral Mitchell. Initiate Operation Thunderbolt." The coalition fleet split apart with practiced precision. The main force peeled off in a wide arc, drawing the attention of the Zarantine defenders. Meanwhile, Randy's strike team, a mix of Omega Fleet's most advanced ships and elite Allied vessels, powered up their jump drives. "Coordinates locked," his navigator reported. "Jump in 3, 2, 1. Space twisted around them as they plunged into the heart of the enemy formation. They emerged in a storm of weapons fire, alarms blaring across the bridge. "Evasive maneuvers," Randy barked. "All ships, commence attack pattern Delta." The human vessels darted and weaved through the Zarantine lines, their advanced weapons carving swaths of destruction. But for every enemy ship they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. On the planet's surface, Fenris watched the space battle unfold on a massive holographic display. He bared his fangs in a snarl. They seek to delay the inevitable, he growled. Deploy the ground forces. Crush them. Massive hangar doors ground open, disgorging waves of Zarantine armor and mechs. The sky filled with anti-aircraft fire as Randy's ships strafed the installation. In the midst of the chaos, a single dropship screamed through the atmosphere, its hull glowing cherry red from the friction. Inside, Captain Jake Samuels and his team braced for impact. "Remember the mission," Jake shouted over the roar. "We find that bunker and shut down the cannon at all costs." The dropship slammed into the ground, its occupants spilling out into a hail of plasma fire. Jake's team fought their way across the battlefield, dodging artillery shells and mech fire. Finally, they reached the bunker entrance. Jake took cover behind a twisted piece of wreckage, gesturing to his demo expert. "Plant the charges. We'll breach on my mark." The explosion rocked the facility, but Zarantine defenders poured from the smoke. Jake's team engaged in brutal close-quarters combat. A plasma bolt caught Jake square in the chest, knocking him back. Fighting through the pain, Jake stumbled to the inner door controls. "Go!" he yelled to his remaining squad members. "I'll seal it behind you!" The team rushed inside as Jake smacked his head on the panel, trapping himself outside but ensuring the mission's continuation. Inside the bunker, the survivors pushed deeper, their numbers dwindling with each firefight. They passed through labs filled with arcane machinery, glimpsing swirling portals that hurt the eyes to look at directly. "What the hell have they been doing down here?" one of Jake's men whispered. They burst into the control room, weapons raised. Fenris stood before a massive control panel, his claws dancing over the controls. "Stop!" Jake commanded. "Shut it down, now!" Fenris turned, his eyes blazing with fanatical intensity. "You understand nothing, human. This is our destiny, our ascension. The galaxy will burn, and from its ashes, we will rise as gods." Jake's gaze flicked to the countdown timer. Precious seconds ticked away. "Last chance," Jake warned, his voice steady despite the blood seeping from his wound. "Power down the cannon." Fenris's only response was a manic laugh. Jake knew what he had to do. "Cover me!" he shouted to his team. Jake sprinted towards the control panel as his soldiers opened fire, buying him those crucial final moments. Jake's voice cracked as he shouted, "Open fire!" His soldiers didn't hesitate, unleashing a hail of plasma bolts at Fenris and the control consoles. The air filled with the acrid smell of ozone and burning circuits. Fenris snarled, his clawed hand slamming down on a hidden panel. A shimmering energy barrier sprang to life around him, deflecting the incoming fire. But in his haste to protect himself, he left the cannon's systems exposed. Jake saw his chance. He sprinted forward, boots pounding on the metal floor. Fenris turned, eyes widening as Jake crashed into him. They tumbled to the ground, a tangle of limbs and fury. Behind them, Jake's team focused their fire on the control nexus. Sparks flew as they methodically destroyed each console, racing against the countdown timer that blinked ominously on the main screen. Fenris's fist connected with Jake's helmet, the impact reverberating through his skull. Cracks spiderwebbed across his visor, obscuring his vision. Jake tore off the useless headgear, feeling the cool air of the bunker on his sweat-slicked face. He reached for his combat knife, the blade glinting in the harsh light. Fenris bared his fangs, claws slashing through the air. They traded blows, a deadly dance of steel and alien flesh. Outside, the planet's surface erupted in chaos. Randy's voice boomed over the comms, directing the Omega Fleet's bombardment. Energy beams lanced down from orbit, vaporizing Zarantine tanks and artillery emplacements. The sky above lit up as the Allied flanking force engaged the Zarantine fleet. Explosions blossomed in the void, debris raining down on the embattled world below. On the ground, Randy led from the front. He piloted a towering combat mech, its massive guns clearing a path through the enemy lines. Behind him, Allied infantry poured through the breach, fighting tooth and nail for every meter of ground. Back in the bunker, Jake and Fenris grappled at the foot of the Singularity Cannon's control dais. Blood dripped from a gash on Jake's forehead, clouding his vision. Fenris's superior strength was wearing him down. The countdown reached its final seconds. Jake knew he was out of time. His hand found the detonator on his combat suit. "For Earth," he growled and pressed the button. The world went white. A thunderous roar filled Jake's ears as the explosion consumed him and Fenris. Heat seared his skin, and then darkness. The blast tore through the control nexus. Circuits overloaded, energy conduits ruptured. The singularity cannon shuddered, its power building to catastrophic levels. Instead of firing, it imploded. A blinding flash lit up the planet's surface as the weapon collapsed in on itself, releasing a wave of destructive energy that shook the very foundations of the bunker. Debris rained down, crushing machinery and bodies alike. The few surviving members of Jake's team were pulverized by falling chunks of ceiling and twisted metal. Outside, Randy stared in horror as the bunker entrance disappeared in a cloud of dust and shrapnel. His heart sank, believing all hope lost. Then, a figure emerged from the choking haze. Jake stumbled forward, his uniform in tatters, skin burned and bloody, but alive. Randy rushed to his side, supporting Jake's weight as he sagged with exhaustion. Around them, the remaining Zarantine forces began to fall back, their will to fight evaporating with the destruction of their superweapon and the loss of their leader. As medics swarmed around Jake, working to stabilize his grievous injuries, Randy surveyed the battlefield. The cost of victory lay strewn across the scarred landscape, broken bodies and shattered machines, both human and alien. The war was over, but its legacy would linger. Randy's gaze drifted to the horizon, where ominous clouds of radioactive fallout were already beginning to gather. He knew the real work was just beginning. Randy Mitchell stood at the viewport of the Omega Fleet's flagship, his eyes fixed on the swirling vortex of energy that now dominated the view where the Zarantine homeworld once stood. The destruction of the Singularity cannon had come at a steep price, and now an even greater threat loomed. "Admiral, we're detecting new rifts forming in Sectors 7 and 9, reported his tactical officer, her voice tense. Randy nodded, his expression resolute. "Deploy containment teams, full hazard protocols." As the orders went out, Randy turned to the holographic display showing Captain Jake Samuels. Despite the bandages covering much of his face, Jake's eyes burned with intensity. "How are you holding up, Jake?" Randy asked. Jake grimaced. "I've been better, sir, but I'm not sitting this one out." "Wouldn't dream of asking you to," Randy replied. "I need your eyes on this containment operation." The comm crackled, and a panicked voice cut through. "Mayday, Mayday! This is Scout Team Epsilon. We're losing control." Static filled the channel, then silence. Randy's fists clenched as another team vanished into the unknown. Dr. Amara Zhang burst onto the bridge, her lab coat fluttering behind her. "Admiral, you need to see this," she said, tapping furiously at her datapad. The main view screen flickered to life, showing a chaotic swirl of colors and shapes that hurt Randy's eyes to look at directly. "What am I seeing, Doctor?" "Reality itself, torn apart," Zhang explained, her voice filled with equal parts excitement and dread. "These rifts, they're windows into other dimensions, other versions of our universe where the fundamental laws of physics are completely alien to our own." Randy watched as amorphous shapes drifted through the kaleidoscopic void. "Are those life forms?" Zhang nodded. "We think so, but nothing like anything we've ever encountered." Alarms blared across the ship. "Sir, the rifts are expanding," shouted the sensor officer. "Rate of growth has increased by 200%. Randy turned to Zhang. "You said you had a theory about sealing these tiers?" "Yes, but it's incredibly risky," Zhang replied. "We'd need to generate a massive subspace inversion, essentially rewinding time in a localized area. But the energy required, it's on par with what the Zarantines were playing with." Randy's comm unit chirped. "Mitchell here." "Admiral, this is General Kraz of the Quarian Defense Force," came a gravelly voice. "My fleet has arrived in system. We demand immediate action to neutralize this threat. We're working on a solution, General, Randy began, but Kraz cut him off. No more delays. If you won't act, we will. I have antimatter warheads primed and ready. Randy's blood ran cold. Stand down, General. That's an order. You don't give me orders, human, Kraz snarled. You have 1 hour to drive this, or we glass the entire sector. The channel closed with a click. Randy turned to Zhang, his face grim. Doctor, I need options now. Zhang's fingers flew over her console. I can have a prototype chronothom injector ready in 45 minutes. But Admiral, the risks... Understood, Randy interrupted. But we're out of time and out of choices. Make it happen. As Zhang rushed off to her lab, Randy stared out at the roiling chaos beyond. The fate of not just one system, but potentially the entire galaxy now rested on a desperate gamble with forces beyond their comprehension. Randy's fingers dug into the armrests of his command chair as he watched the swirling vortex on the monitor. The future of the stars hung in the balance, and he knew there was only one path forward. Dr. Zhang, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. Proceed with the subspace inversion plan. Protests erupted from the comm channels. General Kraz's gravelly voice cut through the din. Mitchell, you can't be serious. This is madness. Randy cut the channel with a flick of his wrist. He turned to his tactical officer. Prep the Omega fleet for deployment. We're going in. On the medical deck, Jake Samuels pushed himself up from his bed, ignoring the stabbing pain in his chest. A nurse tried to stop him, but Jake waved her off. Captain, you're not cleared for duty, she protested. Jake grabbed his uniform. The galaxy's at stake. I'll be damned if I sit this one out. Minutes later, Jake stood on the bridge of the Defiant, staring at the experimental chronothom projector that dominated the rear of the ship. Dr. Zhang's team swarmed around it, making last-minute adjustments. All systems are go, Captain, his helmsman reported. Jake nodded. Take us in. The Defiant's engines flared to life, propelling them towards the contaminated system. As they crossed the threshold, reality itself seemed to warp and twist around them. Jake's stomach lurched as the ship performed a series of rapid micro-jumps, each one bringing them closer to the heart of the dimensional chaos. Mapping complete, Dr. Zhang called out, her eyes fixed on a holographic display of swirling energy patterns. Beginning calibration sequence. Jake watched as his crew worked in perfect synchronization, their hands flying over consoles as they attuned the ship's systems to the alien frequencies surrounding them. The air itself seemed to hum with an otherworldly resonance. Outside, Randy's voice crackled over the comms as he directed the rest of the Omega fleet into position. Massive battleships took up defensive formations, their weapons primed and ready. Engineering teams deploy amplifiers, Randy ordered. Jake watched on the tactical display as dozens of small craft swarmed out from the larger ships, each one carrying a portable subspace amplifier. They began positioning the devices in a wide arc around the system's edge. Suddenly, alarms blared across the bridge. Multiple contacts detected, Jake's sensor officer shouted. They're coming through the rift. Jake's blood ran cold as he saw the impossible shapes emerging from the tear in space-time. The alien vessels defied comprehension, their forms twisting and writhing in ways that hurt the eyes to look at directly. Before Jake could react, the space around them erupted in chaos. Beams of distorted energy lashed out from the alien ships, tearing through the carefully positioned amplifiers like they were made of paper. Evasive maneuvers! Jake barked, gripping his chair as the Defiant lurched to the side. A wave of twisted space-time rolled past them, missing by mere meters. Jake watched in horror as several Omega fleet ships were caught in the onslaught, their hulls buckling and warping under the alien assault. He keyed his comm. All remaining amplifier drones, concentrate deployment over the primary rift nexus. The Defiant danced through the battlefield, its superior agility allowing Jake to thread the needle between waves of reality-bending weapons fire. Around them, Randy's flagship coordinated a fierce counterattack, unleashing volley after volley of disruptor torpedoes and plasma beams. For a moment, it seemed to work. The alien vessels retreated, disappearing back into the rifts from which they came. Jake let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Now's our chance," he said. "Initiate the inversion sequence." The Defiant aligned itself with Zhang's science vessel, their combined warp fields generating a shimmering subspace diaphragm over the hastily deployed amplifier grid. Jake felt the deck plates vibrate beneath his feet as the chronothom projector powered up, drawing on reserves of antimatter and dark energy. Just as the inversion cycle neared its peak, the rifts tore open once more. This time, the invaders poured through in overwhelming numbers. Jake watched in stunned silence as entire sections of the Omega fleet vanished, consumed by geometric abominations of pure entropy. "We're surrounded!" his tactical officer shouted. Jake gritted his teeth, focusing all his willpower on keeping the projector aligned. The Defiant shuddered as alien energies ate away at their shields, alarms screaming from every console. "Admiral Mitchell to all ships," Randy's voice cut through the chaos. "Abandon your positions and concentrate all firepower on these coordinates, now!" Jake watched as the remaining Omega fleet ships formed up, their weapons coalescing into a single, devastating beam of anti-atomization energy. It lanced out, striking the heart of the Rift Nexus just as the inversion sequence reached its zenith. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, reality itself seemed to hiccup. Jake felt a sensation of vertigo as space began to fold in on itself. The rifts collapsed, dragging the alien invaders back into whatever hellish dimension they came from. When it was over, Jake found himself staring at empty space where moments ago, a battle for the destiny of the universe had raged. Debris from destroyed ships began to materialize around them as normal physics reasserted itself. Jake slumped in his chair, exhaustion washing over him. His comm chirped, and Randy's weary voice came through. "Status report, Captain?" Jake looked around his battered bridge, taking in the faces of his surviving crew. "We're still here, Admiral, but at what cost?" As rescue operations began, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was only the beginning of something far larger and more terrifying than they could possibly imagine. The acrid stench of burning circuits filled the bridge of Jake's flagship as emergency klaxons blared. His hands danced across the tactical console, searching for any weakness in the Zarantine defenses. "Status report," Jake barked, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Chen, responded without looking up from her station. "Shields at 23%, sir. Weapon systems barely operational. We've lost contact with the Valiant and the Intrepid." Jake's eyes darted across the holographic display, taking in the dire situation. The massive form of the apocalypse loomed before them, its ancient hull pulsing with eldritch energy. Surrounding it, swarms of void hunters darted and weaved, their singularity projectors ready to ensnare any ship that strayed too close. "Sir, we're detecting a massive energy buildup in the Apocalypse's main weapon array," Chen reported, her voice tight with tension. Jake's mind raced. They couldn't outrun the beam and their shields wouldn't hold against another direct hit. He needed an edge, something unexpected. His eyes fell on the derelict Dyson sphere surrounding them. An idea sparked. "Helm, full power to the starboard thrusters. Bring us in close to the sphere's inner surface," Jake ordered. The helmsman's eyes widened. "Sir, at this range, the gravimetric shear could tear us apart." "Do it," Jake snapped, "and ready all remaining cyclonic torpedoes." The ship lurched as its engines strained against the crushing gravity of the Dyson sphere. Warning lights flashed across every console as the hull groaned under the immense stress. Jake watched the tactical display, counting down the seconds. Just as the Apocalypse's weapon reached full charge, he gave the order. "Fire torpedoes, full spread, then cut engines and go dark." A salvo of torpedoes erupted from the ship's tubes, streaking towards the Dyson sphere's surface. In the split second before impact, Jake's ship killed all power, becoming a cold, dark speck against the massive structure. The torpedoes slammed into the sphere, their cyclonic warheads boring deep into its ancient hull. Massive chunks of debris exploded outward, creating a localized debris field that obscured sensors and disrupted targeting systems. At that precise moment, the apocalypse fired its devastating beam. But instead of striking Jake's ship, it lanced through the debris cloud and slammed into the Dyson sphere itself. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the entire structure. Jake's ship rocked violently as the gravitational distortions intensified. "Helm, get us out of here!" he shouted. As they limped away from the chaos, Jake opened a channel to the rest of his battered fleet. "All ships, make for the exit aperture. We've bought ourselves some time, but we need to regroup with the main fleet." He watched as the surviving Omega ships fell into formation around him. The Apocalypse and its escorts were temporarily occupied with the cascading destruction spreading across the Dyson sphere's surface. Jake tapped his comm unit. "This is Captain Samuels to Admiral Mitchell. We've dealt the Zarantine a blow, but we're outgunned and need immediate reinforcement. Transmitting coordinates now." As they raced towards the ring's exit, Jake could only hope Randy's relief force would arrive in time. The respite they'd gained was temporary at best, and the full might of the Zarantine fleet still loomed behind them, hungry for revenge. Jake's eyes darted across the tactical display, his mind racing as he processed the dire situation. The Zarantine apocalypse loomed before them, its ancient hull pulsing with eldritch energy that made his skin crawl. "All Omega craft, form up in staggered attack formation," Jake barked into the comm. "We're going straight through the ring's interior." His helmsman's voice cracked with tension. "Sir, that's suicide!" "It's our only shot," Jake replied, his fingers flying over the console as he plotted their desperate trajectory. The Defiant lurched forward, leading the remnants of the Omega fleet on a breakneck charge through the massive Dyson ring. Void Hunters swarmed around them, their singularity projectors creating deadly gravitational traps. "Evasive pattern Delta," Jake shouted. "Execute stagger warp jumps on my mark." The human ships blinked in and out of existence, their erratic movements confounding the Zarantine targeting systems. Jake felt his stomach lurch with each microjump, the fabric of space-time stretching and snapping around them. "Cyclonic torpedoes, full spread," he ordered. A salvo of brilliant energy streaked ahead of the fleet, detonating in a dazzling light show that shredded the Zarantine singularity grids. Through the gap, they flew, Jake's nucleus tightening on the armrests as they hurtled deeper into the ring's interior. Alarms blared across the bridge. "Sir, the Apocalypse is powering up its main weapon." Jake's blood ran cold as he saw the behemoth's reactor cores ignite with impossible energies. The world's Sunder Lancer, a weapon of terrifying, destructive potential, began to track their movements. "All power to engines," Jake roared. "Prepare for emergency warp jump." Time seemed to slow as cosmic forces gathered at the Apocalypse's prow. Just as the devastating beam lanced out, Jake slammed his hand down on the warp initiator. Reality twisted around them as the Defiant leapt through space, emerging amidst the burning wreckage of a Zarantine battlecruiser. The Lancer blast struck a moment later, vaporizing the debris field into a storm of subatomic particles. Jake's tactical officer shouted over the cacophony of alarms. "We've cleared their defensive line, but we're deep in the ring's interior." Through the view screen, Jake saw their true objective, the ring's central gravitonic stabilization hub. Its once impenetrable armor now scarred and pitted from previous engagements. "Target those exposed nodes," Jake commanded. "Fire everything we've got." The Defiant shuddered as it unleashed its arsenal. Hellfire missiles and shockwave mines slammed into the ancient structure, each impact sending spiderweb cracks racing along its surface. Void Hunters closed in, their weapons slicing through space around them. Jake watched in horror as several of his escort ships vanished in silent explosions, overwhelmed by the onslaught. But it was working. The Dyson ring groaned, a sound that reverberated through the very bones of the ship. Structural fissures spread like lightning across its curved interior. "We've done it," Jake's science officer cried out. "The ring's integrity is failing." A deafening screech of tearing metal filled the air as the colossal structure began to twist and buckle. The Zarantine fleet, caught in the ring's death throes, was tossed about like leaves in a hurricane. Even the mighty Apocalypse, for all its technological terrors, found itself momentarily adrift in the chaos. "Full power to engines," Jake shouted. "Get us out of here." The Defiant and its few remaining comrades screamed away from the imploding megastructure, dodging chunks of debris the size of small moons. Just as it seemed they might be overtaken by the tsunami of wreckage, new contacts appeared on their sensors. "It's Admiral Mitchell!" The relief in Jake's tactical officer's voice was palpable. Randy's reinforcements plowed through the debris field, carving a path for Jake's battered fleet to follow. As they regrouped amidst clouds of superheated metal and exotic radiation, Jake opened a channel to the Admiral's flagship. "Randy, the Apocalypse took a beating, but it's still operational," Jake reported, his voice hoarse, "and its warp drive is powering up for something big." Randy's grim visage filled the view screen. "We're picking up localized warp tremors. It's not retreating. It's preparing to jump within the system." The horrifying realization dawned on both commanders simultaneously. The Zarantine dreadnought, in a final act of defiance, intended to use its own mass as a weapon of unparalleled destruction. "We have to stop it," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Randy nodded, his face set with iron grit. "Agreed. All ships, form up. We end this now, or there won't be a system left to save." As the combined human fleet moved to intercept the Apocalypse, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle was only just beginning. Jake's eyes snapped open, his vision swimming as reality reasserted itself. The acrid stench of ozone and burnt circuitry filled his nostrils. Warning lights flashed across his helmet's HUD, indicating critical system failures throughout his suit. "Status report," he croaked, his voice barely audible over the suit's dying power core. No response came from his team. Jake's heart sank as he realized he was alone, adrift in the cosmic void. The last moments aboard the Apocalypse replayed in his mind: the chaotic firefight, the reactor's meltdown, his comrades sacrificing themselves to overload the entropy reaction. Jake's gaze swept across the star-filled expanse. Debris from the shattered Zarantine dreadnought drifted past, twisted fragments of alien technology rendered inert by the cataclysmic explosion. In the distance, he could make out the Allied fleet limping away, their hulls scarred and battered from the grueling battle. A burst of static crackled through Jake's comm unit. "Anyone, this is Admiral Mitchell. All port in." Jake's fingers fumbled with the comm controls, but his suit's power levels were too low to broadcast a response. He watched helplessly as the fleet grew smaller, unaware of his presence. A proximity alert flashed on his HUD. Jake's blood ran cold as he saw shadowy, amorphous shapes materializing in the void around him. Tendrils of darkness reached out, probing the space near his drifting form. Jake's suit sensors struggled to analyze the entities, but one thing was clear: they weren't of this universe. The transdimensional horrors unleashed by the Apocalypse's destruction hungered for new prey. As panic threatened to overwhelm him, Jake felt a sharp tug. His nanotether, still anchored to the Apocalypse's last known coordinates, activated. With a lurch that made his stomach turn, Jake was yanked through space, away from the approaching void creatures. He tumbled end over end, the stars blurring into streaks of light. Jake's armor creaked and groaned, threatening to come apart at the seams. Just as he thought the G-forces would tear him apart, he slammed into something solid. Gasping for breath, Jake found himself sprawled across a chunk of debris larger than a shuttle. Alien circuitry pulsed weakly beneath his feet, the last vestiges of the Apocalypse's unholy technology. As his vision cleared, Jake saw the full extent of the devastation. The star system was a graveyard of broken ships and cosmic wreckage. Pockets of space-time still rippled and distorted, aftershocks from the dreadnought's death throes. Jake staggered to his feet, his suit's power core sputtering. He knew he had to find a way to signal the retreating fleet before his life support failed. But as he surveyed the cosmic battlefield, a chilling realization set in. This victory had come at a terrible cost. How many of his fellow soldiers had been consumed by the entropy reaction? How many more had fallen to the Zarentine's nightmarish bioweapons? And what of the eldritch horrors now loose in the universe? Jake's fists clenched as he stared into the abyss. They had won the day, but at what price? And what new terrors awaited humanity in the wake of this Pyrrhic victory? With a final surge of purpose, Jake began to scavenge the debris field. He had to find a way to boost his suit's power and send out a distress signal. The war might be over, but his fight for survival was just beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.